All right, good evening. This is Global Dissident Voices on the Mad American Network. And I have Mamela Fiallo Flor from the Libertarian Party of Cuba and Mises Institute with me tonight. And you guys have been a big topic of conversations for libertarians in America. We've been following the struggles of the Benjamin Franklin Library and Mises Cuba and the foundation of this party. So please go ahead and kind of introduce yourself and maybe give everybody a little biography of your self and how you became involved in this movement.
Hi, as you said, I'm Mamela Fiallo Flor. I was born in Ecuador, raised in the U.S., South Florida, so I'm technically Cuban at heart. I've been living in Argentina for the past 12 years, where I came in contact with the Liberty Movement through a nice conference that was called Freedom as a Solution to Poverty. And with the Acton Institute, which are Catholic libertarians, so my path along the liberty spectrum has been vast. And actually, the way I got in contact with Cuban libertarians was very humane. 2 years ago, I lost my grandmother, who I loved very much, and I wrote something beautiful. And a Cuban anarcho-capitalist told me, "You really reached me." And to me, the fact that someone so many miles away was touched by a personal story made me really think about what voluntarism is and how our values connect us much more than space, land, or whatever. It's our ethics.
Yeah, that is something that this show is basically about. Is as I was sailing on the United States Navy and traveling around the world, and of course, people from like the Philippines and other countries will join, the United States Navy, and so I started to meet, and I realized there was like in every country in the world, there's like a guy like me that is like, screw this government, like I want to like be free, and is like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, how are these people even able to say this stuff, And so as I grew older and got involved in the liberty movement myself, I just kind of started reaching out to those people. And, the internet has been great for that because, you can get a hold of all kinds of people and interact with them. And, like the way I met you was basically an internet friend through a friend, So, yeah, I think that you're touching on something very important right there. There's somebody, no matter what country you live in or what oppression you're facing, somebody else feels the same way in every country on earth.
Exactly. You got it.
So, the genesis of this, how long has Mises been involved in Cuba? Because there was a lot of people that were very surprised upon the news of the arrest of the activists, that there was a Mises Institute operating in Cuba. In fact, one of the Libertarian National Committee members was like, how cool is that? There's a Mises Cuba.
Exactly. Well, it all started with the Anarcho-Capitalist Club of Cuba. And little by little, we were sending pen drives, information, books, and the club kept growing. Then it evolved into Mises Cuba. When one of the founding members moved to Miami, he was able to get off the island, and he contacted many of us. His name is Joyce Garcia. We are very grateful towards him. He contacted us. He built a network. And for personal reasons, he's become a little bit distant because hardship is really, really an issue. All of our members have been in prison, have been beaten, have been tortured. He was one of them. So he was our link. And little by little, I contacted more people. I was more active because the guys on the island need internet access. So in Cuba, you don't have a computer at your home. You don't have a smartphone. It doesn't work like that. So Google just arrived last month offering internet. But for now, what you do is online, you put credit on they have like an internet sign-in under their name. And for $20, you buy them 1 hour per dollar, which in Cuba is a lot. If the average salary is $20 per month, that's a lot. So
yeah, we actually shared that link, and we'll do it again after the show for everybody that wants to contribute. And I've got a good friend; he's been going down there also. We'll talk offline. I'm not going to out some people because I don't want their activities to become known. But there is a lot of us supporting with direct aid this movement down there. So these pen drives and things that you're sending a lot of people to kind of lay this out for the audience, they created the Benjamin Franklin Library, which is amazing in and of itself. And I like this idea that we were inspired, with our various histories and these stories of these men that are risking and getting beaten and stuff for freedom, is going to inspire us just right back. So the library is a traveling, like, mobile library. Am I correct? Like, you bring this to different places, and then local people in the different places can come and view this material and, like, learn this stuff and download it. Am I right on that?
Okay, so for the time being, the library has a physical space, and this was a decision whether we should or we shouldn't. So in this stage of the libertarian movement on the island, we've decided to become visible. So the team on the island actually had it legalized like an entity. So they know who we are, they know we're there, and it's inside one of the family's homes, which they are the president and vice president of the party. So where they live, that's where the library is. And there have been workshops, and we're already planning. So our next campaign is to gather funds to build the second library in another province in Camagüey.
That's amazing. That takes some pretty big cojones, to put the library in your house. Yeah, man. I'm so impressed with this. It's a bravery right there. I mean, I have to be honest with you. A lot of times we talk about, the IRS and different things we face in America, but man, just to have to put your neck out like that, just to bring information to people, and to, with the censorship that goes on under communism, it's pretty amazing. Exactly.
And we've been lucky because the libertarian movement, the anarcho-capitalist movement, has been growing in the Spanish-speaking community. So we actually received books from, like, university professors in Spain, 3 boxes of books. And it's awesome. Amazing. Yes. And there has been persecution. We have 2 brothers in prison. They've been there since February. And what has happened is that many of our members have been kidnapped for a matter of hours, intimidated, then released. And we're trying to organize a conference per month. So it's basically people getting together in the teeny tiny library and talking about ethics, liberty, economy, different subjects related to what we care about. And sometimes the police don't let them arrive, or they're waiting for them outside.
Yeah, they're having like the roadblock or something because they hear you're going to be doing something and kind of try to dissuade you from attending by being in the area and intimidation.
Exactly.
So for the listeners, because not, some of these things were going on, we had, and you might not even know some of this, I heard about the arrests, and not long after that, the Libertarian Party of Nevada was first on the scene that I know of, and they kind of spread the word to everybody, which was amazing, and I appreciate that. And they tried to get a motion, I believe their region rep, put it up, at the LNC. Well, there started to become a bunch of bickering and different arguments going on, and people were, which kind of angered me. They were like, well, we don't want to disrespect another country, and I'm like, that's a communist dictatorship. We're going to promote freedom, But anyhow, they basically, the first motion failed, and I was part of a group that I wrote some articles, and the Libertarian Party of Florida responded by issuing a press release wholly in support, and we started fundraising campaign and tried to, with this, helping them with their minutes, for their phones so they can communicate and all this stuff. And the pressure that we put on in combination with some other state libertarian parties, the LNC revisited the issue and unanimously passed this motion in support of these prisoners and the Mises people. And a few weeks later was the foundation of the party in Cuba. All of those who at the time, was questioning the effort, it just goes to show you that and the way that you said you originally met that person there, we inspire each other by sticking up and defending each other across the world, even when we may not have a physical presence with each other or in a different country. It matters that we care about each other and support about each other. So I was very, you guys, that party was founded the weekend of our annual convention. So here we were all together in Cocoa Beach, and we were, planning, electing our new leaders and all that. And then to hear this news at the end of the weekend, it really inspired us. And I feel like we're all even more motivated because of what you guys are doing. And so, I want to thank you for that too.
Oh, absolutely. You're welcome. And thank you. And really, that's the idea. This is a matter of strategy. There are two main reasons that I personally do what I do for Cuba. One is strategy, because if you expose what socialism is like when it reaches the stage it reaches in Cuba, it's a preventive strategy. We don't want to live like that. And number two, if we promote private solidarity, private initiative, do it yourself. That's the idea. Why expect someone else to do what you can do? And thirdly, giving people hope. The fact that some side of the ocean is doing something for you is so motivating. And likewise, it's motivating to do it too for them.
Sure. Well, you feel isolated and like you're under this regime. We talked to Victor Gruber in Venezuela, and here, their country is in full meltdown. But just being able to even joke about the socialism and just to talk about it and let have people care and know that people are watching and listening, and like you say, a lot of people in America are complacent because we have been so prosperous for so long. So to say, look at this policy right now, California and New York are trying to nationalize or single payer healthcare. And this is kind of the end game of the Obama. They're doing these statist solutions, so we can say, no, look what happened when they did this there. Look at the inflation in Venezuela. Look at the poverty and oppression in Cuba. We can say we don't want to go down that road. So it's like you say, this cross-cultural exchange is mutually beneficial because we can show the American people why they should maybe not be so apathetic and should be more concerned. But at the same time, we can also tell these people in the wilderness, being an anarcho-capitalist in Cuba, I mean, I can't even imagine. That's amazing. Like, so to tell them, hey, man, kick ass right on, that's also something that I think lifts both parties up.
Absolutely. The fact that we're doing this, just to have a scope of how free we are for now, we have high tech computers, phones, whatever. You're smoking a cigar. We're relaxed. And we can speak freely about what we're speaking about. They don't have access to that. They're not even free to give their opinion on that. They can go to jail because it's counter-revolutionary. And now it's better than a couple of decades ago. In the 70s, you could get a lobotomy because thinking like an individual was considered a mental illness.
That's a mind-blowing, thing, because, we talk a lot of things about cultural genocide and mind control and these terms, and people just don't really, seem to understand. But when you go back into the history, Cuba was once a very vibrant, very wealthy, they have plenty of resources. And, before the communists took over, it was a vacation place. It was a pleasure place, it's like going to Vegas, and people would go down there at time and enjoy the tropical atmosphere, and there's, all sorts of things going on. So
and in every aspect, for instance, before 1959, when the communist revolution started, there were more movie theaters in Cuba, in Havana. Just in the city of Havana, there were more movie theaters than in New York and Paris. And what was the first industry the Cuban regime took over? The film industry. Why? Because it's propaganda.
Absolutely. Those are two
parallels people don't think about. They think that Cuba was in the Ice Age or the Stone Age before Castro, and it's not like that. It's the total opposite. I know people I love, I have family there, that the government actually entered their homes to take their extra cups. Because socialism isn't just about industry and production. It's about being equal in the sense that you can't be different. So you can't have fine cups That's counter-revolutionary. However, the dictator, and his closest men, they end up having what you once had. So well, it's equality for the masses. It's like the Animal Farm.
Yeah, it's funny. My daughter is, she just graduated the 5th grade, and she's reading that book, and it's so great to see her like read this book and totally get it. We were at the protest there trying to destroy the monuments, throughout the South that were made after the war to kind of heal and respect the veterans and everything. So she says, we're walking back to the car, and she goes, Daddy, did none of those people read history books? But this is something that I'm sure that when the communists took over, they probably wiped out a lot of historical figures and monuments. That I have to assume that happened too, right? Because you can't have people looking back towards the heroes that helped found and make the country great if you want to take it over and change everything that's going on.
Or you have to rewrite history. For example, José Martí, which is the Cuban national hero of independence. That's who our Libertarian Party is named after, José Martí. He was a libertarian. He fought for liberty. And now the communist rhetoric took over him. So it took over him as a figure.
So tell us a quick, because, a lot of that's part of the point of the show is to kind of promote this idea. There's somebody like us everywhere. So while we might not all know about George Washington, why don't you give us a quick recap of José Martí's revolution or whatever freedom that he fought for. Tell us about real quick recap of that. Since they want to wipe it out, let's tell everybody about it.
Okay, so that's part of it. He was part of in retrospect, Cuba was a Spanish province. It was the last colony to become free from Spain. So he was one of the instigators to become independent, which is fascinating because before the Cuban Revolution, the Castro Revolution, 75% of Cuba was white. And one of the fallacies of current Cuban history is that the black population is what's keeping the Cuban Revolution alive because blacks were oppressed before Castro. But the president he sought out of power with his revolution was a black man, Batista. So it's this rewriting of history, and Fidel Castro's father was a Spaniard and was a landlord. So there's this...
So he was like the lefty little college Antifa, and they're son of little rich kids, but they want to be commie revolutionaries, which is like ridiculous in and of it. It's like they have guilt for their own thing, so they want to, it's kind of a funny anecdote.
Exactly, and so the rhetoric is that he made them all equal. He made them all equally miserable, that's true. But he's rewriting history, and the same thing happened with the indigenous population and the black population. He banned languages, indigenous languages, African languages, and Spanish became the only language. And then when it was beneficial for tourism, some Indians started popping up.
Yeah, so that's a funny thing you mentioned too, because, so we got Jose, and he's fighting the Spanish, monarchy or whatever the deal is going down, which was just like when George Washington fought the English. So you got this guy, he's like this hero, like you say, the country has a black president, but to the communists, they take it over for put a rich Spanish guy in there and call it diversity and equality,
Exactly. Sorry, I had some overlapping there just for a second. So that's the thing.
Yeah.
It puts for diversity, like you're saying, but equality is an opposite of diversity. You can be equal before the law, but not through the law. So the equality that communists profess means nullifying diversity.
No, it does. The equality of opportunity versus the equality of result. That's a quote that I like to use. I like what you just said a lot too.
Absolutely. And if you want to get into the conspiracy atmosphere, not even. It's logic, common sense. Look at what happened with JFK's proposal of equality before the law and LBJ's proposal of equality through the law. There was a transition there in American history also.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wrote about that recently, about the hijacking of the civil rights movement in the 1920s by the left-wing, Marxist progressives, and how they basically, Booker T. Washington and Marcus Garvey were promoting this idea that, well, if you want people to not think that you're inferior, make a valuable good or service, and they will be like, "Ooh, I like what these people are making," and everything. You know what I'm saying? It wants to make the government. W.E.B. Du Bois wanted to use the government, forces to make everybody equal, like you say. I really like the way that you just framed that, because I think that really drives the point home about this difference in the idea that a meritocracy, which is essentially the libertarian position, is the following of nature's law, and they say the will of your creator is expressed in nature. So we have this. If you can use your intellect and all the gifts that you are given to try to increase your standing, and you should have those rewards, and nobody should steal it and give it to somebody else who did not work for it or earn it. And by this manner, we always improve ourselves, over the eons and get better. Whereas communism says, no, equality is, to them, is like looking at the forest, and instead of seeing, like, if they see a tree that's shorter than the other one, whereas a libertarian would fertilize the other tree or try to show it how to get some more water, the communists would cut the tall tree down to the low level of the lowest tree.
I actually heard from an Australian friend where, as you know, Australia is becoming increasingly progressive.
Yep.
Told me about the tall poppy syndrome as something positive. So the poppy is the historical British flower that's a symbol of peace, right?
Yep.
So tall poppy syndrome is about when a poppy grows above the others, it's time to cut it. So I'm an English teacher, and when I speak about outstanding, it means that you stand out. So this, according to progressives, which progressives is a word that expresses the contrary of its meaning, because it's not about progress, but about moving progressively towards communism. So progressives say that if you're unequal, then you should adjust to the rest. So instead of seeing that one poppy is redder, one poppy is taller, one poppy is rounder, one poppy is cuter, because we all have our differences, that we should be equal, and that's our benefit. So it's forcing you to be blind, and it's forcing you to be unethical. So that's the thing that's happening in Cuba. One of our brothers I like to call them my brothers because they're my family, because families share common values. So Nelson,
we use that language too here. We call your brothers and sisters, So yeah.
Yeah. So our brother who was kidnapped on Monday, he writes for Pan Am Post, which is a free market oriented online newspaper. And he wrote a story about a guy who was an entrepreneur. And in Cuba, you have brigades where, very 1984, you have brigades where your neighbors complain. And he had a house he inherited, he had land he inherited, and he was well off for Cuba. So his neighbors considered this counter-revolutionary because he was unequal, and he was detained for having more than the rest. And then, since they couldn't put him in prison for that, they created false evidence and false witnesses, and these witnesses were confronted, and they went to the police and said they were lies. And instead, now the witnesses are facing trials. The false witnesses are facing trials for saying that the police lied.
Wow.
I'll send you the link to the on Pan Am Post.
Yeah, after the show, please do go ahead and revisit the comment section of the video, because you can post some of these links just for kind of like for people that want to take more interest and read up on it. But I want to touch on this because this is something that really is kind of more like almost a spiritual level amongst human beings. When I meet a person that, like when I'm met Victor from Venezuela or talking to you right now, it's just like, yes, and you're like, you feel like you're talking to this person that just quote unquote gets it or whatever, right? And I think that when there really is still, if you go back to like the religious view of the world, this like struggle between good and evil. And when you have like a human being and I see like my friend has a business and he succeeds and builds a nicer house for his family, and I think, man, good for him, like right on, and we go have a beer, we celebrate, and I help him, I'm an electrician, so maybe I help him wire something on his new house or something, and we do this together, and we celebrate it. Then you have the type of person that says, I can't believe he has something nicer than me, he thinks he's better than me, you know what I mean? So like really I've been trying to frame this better for libertarians in America that, with the fall of fascism and Nazism in the 1940s, all you have left as the collectivists' main engine is communism, Marxism, socialism.
And they're just right, because after all, that's something we should constantly remind people. By calling Nazis Nazis, you're taking the word socialism out of National Socialism. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you've got this communist, and I'll touch on an angle on that in a minute, but the last form of collectivism, which is like just ruining South America, Central America, Cuba, it's in Africa, we had some people from South Africa talking about what's going on there. That is horrible. So you've got this situation though, and to me, it's like everything about the Marxist worldview, it panders to the most base and most lowest forms of human emotion, like envy, like greed, like, because they're just, like you say, they have nice china in their cabinets, so the proletariat never has a revolution anyways. They just replace the oligarchy with an oligarchy of like really worse people than, like some railroad baron still gave a lot of people jobs. The communist takes everything and leaves everybody in poverty.
Exactly. It's very important that you speak about the oligarchy. That's why I mentioned that Fidel's dad was a landlord, and a Spanish landlord, so a descendant of the conquerors. And as you can see, I descend from conquerors as well, but that's an even longer story. But that's the thing. Like you said about these Antifa kids, they're separating themselves from their own history. We descend from settlers at some point, most of us. Maybe not the conquerors themselves, but settlers for sure. So that's the thing.
A settler and a conqueror is different. Yeah, a settler and a conqueror is different. See, like to me, when I like the people, that is one thing that I am proud as an American is because this was like people around the world that said, man, like I want to have a better life, and they like risk. They're not really the same guy that maybe comes in arms, and the only thing that a lot of the Americans conquered was the wilderness. They made it their own, and there's a whole kind of a false historical narrative on that, because they try to there was a 300-year decline in the Indians in America before the European settlers got here, and they try to make the communist always tries to make a race issue where there isn't one for a divide and conquer thing. But I think that's an important thing. Like you say, it doesn't matter if you are descendant of a Spaniard or of an African slave, because I have a good friend, he's in our party, and he just spoke with us on the monuments, and he's a descendant of slaves. And here we are, the descendant of Confederates, myself and him, the descendant of slaves, but we still speaking for freedom and against the whitewash of history and cultural Marxism and the other forms of Marxism. So like you say, these are something that it distills humanity out of us to be like, to the libertarian view is like always, libertarian people are just generally good people. Whereas communists, you can almost pretty much guarantee they're an asshole.
Or have been lied to.
Yeah, well, those are the useful idiots, right? Isn't that what, was that Stalin that called him that? Or Lenin? The useful idiot, Yeah. It was like they delude them, those are the guys that are just, having a bad life of it, and they're in the lower class. So and that's the problem, is you've got this kind of like, the achievers will be always, the visionaries will be like a little bit, they will be in the numbers, so they basically like, hey, we could overthrow the people we don't like by appealing to, this other class, and kind of like telling people that aren't as well educated, all these things. And I think that's what's so amazing about the Ben Franklin Library, in my opinion, is that you're educating people. And once you can't read, economics in one lesson by Henry Hazlitt and come out of it and be like, I want to be a commie. You just can't do it. Education is so important. Great that's how.
A very good friend of mine that's a psychologist wrote to me last week, and he told me, I wanted to let you know that a Marxist friend of mine is now a libertarian. And he said, you know what I discovered? You can be an idiot and be a Marxist but to be a libertarian, you have to be very well educated.
That's true. I heard a quote a long time ago, and I always use it because people, a lot of the people that they appeal to, they get in the universities, the long march through the institutions, by the Frankfurt School Institute for Social Research. They knew that they could get in there. Like, you can't change a guy's mind, but you could take his kids and kind of mold them, but Winston Churchill had a quote, and he said, if you're not a socialist when you're 20, maybe you don't have a heart, but if you're still one when you are 40, you don't have a brain.
Yeah, that's a very good quote. I know some hardcore communists who were, my dad was one of them. My dad was a hardcore communist, and he actually trained with Che Guevara in Cuba. And he knew him face to face and told me, and I'm not ashamed to say this at all, I'm actually very proud. And Che Guevara was so ruthless that he didn't approve the course because he was so bloodthirsty. So in the art of war, you win when you conquer an objective. And he sent all his men to die and killed all of his enemies. And my father was impeccable. So he won a scholarship and studied with Mao Zedong in China.
It's funny you mentioned that because, Victor Gruber is Venezuelan, and he's an anarcho-capitalist in Venezuela, and he's down there dealing with, all that stuff. But his father was also a member of the Communist Party, and that was kind of the genesis of his looking into a new belief system, was that his, father became disenfranchised after he went to Russia, I believe, or China or something, and, kind of saw the kind of end game. But you bring up Che, and I think that's another important thing to expose the lies of communism and Marxism, because Che Guevara was a racist, and he killed gay people, and he just a little bit about times of Che, because these kids wear these Che t-shirts, and it's real hard to deal with the non-aggression principle when I see it, because I want to take it off of them and beat their heads in, but I kind of grew out of doing
and that's something we have to elaborate. We can co-write a paper about that. His family was active in the gold rush in the West, in the US. That's how they made a lot of money. Che Guevara. And another thing important about him in that phase in Cuban history is the re-education process. So Fidel Castro once said that Cuban prostitutes are the most educated in the world. So allegedly, what he did was bring high morals back to the island, because the rumor was that Cuba was America's brothel, right? So since in Cuba, education is free, it's paid for by the government, you have plenty of doctors, but earning $20 a month. So you have doctors and teachers who are prostitutes. That's why he made that disgusting comment. So that's the thing. When he became president, 100,000 prostitutes were taken off the street. So I don't know what your take is on that profession, but in any case, if it's voluntary, it's your body. If you get paid to type, why don't you get paid to do what you want to do with the waist, from the waist down? But the point is, he reinserted these women into the state, and they became secretaries for ministers. So what did they become? Instead of earning their profit and making their money, they offered these same services to state officials, to military officials, but typing. You see what I mean?
Oh yeah, I see what you mean.
So gay people were also in this re-education process because, well, you may know that homosexuality is considered a bourgeois deviation. Why? Because it's your own personal desire. And socialists think collectively. So they despised it in an early stage. It was despicable. That's why they went against this, and homosexuals were in re-education programs such as prostitutes. And now all of a sudden you see people in gay pride parades with Che Guevara t-shirts and communist flags, when they would have been in concentration camps a couple of decades ago.
Yeah, it just shows the ignorance of the left, which is, that was my thing. It was like the Democrat Party in America, they were the party of these Jim Crow laws and segregation and all this. And when they saw the writing on the wall, all the Democrats flipped and they created this Great Society, they called it, program, and basically they decided they would give them handouts to people rather than deny them their civil rights. So they said, sure, here's your civil rights, but then they got them dependent on government, and they made jokes behind the scenes, which these things of course come out over the decades of tapes, but people kind of don't pay attention or really ponder the idea that these Democrats that were once for segregation, a few years later said, screw it, we'll give them a bunch of free stuff and have them vote Democrat for the next 20 years, and then on top of that, if you look at what they did, and this is something that's important to understand how Marxism advances itself, is they destroy every other cultural items of the community. Like I'm sure in Cuba, right, they probably, like you say, with the heroes like Jose Marti and all these, they want to deny all that, because anything you can look to for strength or to get you through a hard time and persevere and overcome, they want to erase that. So it's just something that not a lot of people pay attention to. So, when they'll kill the gay people, but then when it becomes advantageous to use them in the culture war, the left will support the gay rights movement, but not really, because what they did in America, they just gave them the right to have their property divided by the government. When really what the real rights would be, we should not go to the government for a license for our personal relationship, right? Because
let me bring an awesome book I have, okay? Just a second.
Yeah. Now we're trading books. You can't beat that.
Look. Can you see it?
I can't. My video feed is a little bit screwed up, but I'm used to it. But go ahead, just read the title to me.
Your audience can see it. It's called The Black Book of the New Left, and it has a picture of Che Guevara with lipstick and the feminist logo on his forehead and some eyeshadow. So
oh man!
It's in Spanish. I'll fortunately translate it someday. So the subtitle is Gender Ideology or Cultural Subversion. So it speaks precisely about how the left took over the gay movement and feminism.
Yeah. Man, I would love to have that. See, this is another thing, and I want to make sure that I mention this because, of course, being in Florida, we have a lot of Spanish-speaking members in our Libertarian Party. So one of the things that I'm really interested to do is I would like to see about having some people on the island, because I know that they suppress journalism and things there, right? So I've got people willing to translate these items. So I would like to reach out and let them know that we would love to. I have a website and I edit for outlets and media, and I have a bunch of state parties and even some people in Europe, like different groups that want to publicize your stories and kind of, give a voice. So make sure everybody knows, if you, funnel me that stuff, and we'll translate it and post it for the English speaking audience as well, so that we can kind of get this out, because I really love this, like you do, that's a book I don't have. It's in another language. I would love to have that translated or try to make that happen,
Yeah, and it's booming on Amazon, even in countries where they don't speak Spanish, because it's fascinating and it's the first book of its kind. So what we were saying about, before we get too off subject, something's very important, especially for young people and free speech that's becoming a real issue in American campuses. So a lot of kids think that free stuff is actually free. So in Cuba, you need a license to work. Of course, in the US, you need a license for many practices. But if you're a dissident in Cuba, you can't work. So our main man on the island, Nelson Rodriguez Chartran, he's an attorney, but since he's a dissident, he can't work. So you literally can't make a living if you're a dissident. You get isolated professionally, and then you get isolated socially, because people don't want to talk to you anymore. They don't want to be seen near you, because what happens once the government targets you? You get followed. You have a motorcycle following you all the time. So you lose friends.
Yeah, well, this is something and this is what Antifa is trying to do here. I have a good friend, and he was protesting some monuments, and somebody took a picture and they sent it to his employer, and they said that he was from his job for taking part in this protest for the monuments, and they're trying to bring that stuff. Even in its infancy, it's like they're even before they actually are controlling the government totally. Although they're got a good socialism has a good foothold in American government, but they're doing that already. And they're ostracizing like one of the left here. If you're not a communist, you're a Nazi or a fascist, and that's like they use the word. And they're already trying to do that socially, to you. And I faced that actually coming into the party, because I had a background in farther right movements, and I, traveled the world and kind of grew up a little bit. And, but yeah, that was definitely a weapon that is already kind of like coming out of its sheath now. I mean, that's what they're doing. They pepper spray some old lady, call her a Nazi, because she's protesting for some free speech or something.
Exactly. That's the thing. You can fall into those movements, but once you see that, just a little aspect in your speech that's slightly different can make you the enemy. So that's the thing. Because collectivist movements always need an enemy to unite. Because when you unite coercively, you'll exclude violently. That's the option. So we can have a collective if it's voluntary. We can't collectivize in a mandatory way. So, and even freedom of religion is an issue in Cuba. It's in cycles. Sometimes there's certain repression towards some groups. For example, Jehovah's Witnesses have it really bad because they're not loyal to a mundane God.
Right.
So they can't participate in certain government acts, so they hate them. And they have problem accessing school or finishing high school. It depends. There are phases when it's even against Catholics in certain periods. There's a very, very beautiful group on the island. They're called Damas de Blanco, which are ladies in white. They go to church on Sunday dressed in white, and after that they march, requesting the release of political prisoners who are usually their husband, brothers, sons. And actually, one of those ladies is the president of the Libertarian Party in Cuba. And that's something that left-wing feminists will never talk to you about, that there are only male leaders in Cuba. So the first president of a party is the Libertarian one, a female president. And she's one of those ladies.
We literally were just talking about this. We were just talking about this in Florida, because there is this perception, even in America, that the Libertarian Libertarian movement and party is kind of a sausage fest, like predominantly men. And but I like Alachua County. I'm a regional representative, so my job I came to an area where I have 9 counties. There was no party, so now we have 2 good parties, and I've got 3 more I'm about to kick off. So but the first one that I kicked off is 2 women and 2 men. Is in the executive committee. So I actually just talked to them today. I said I'm going to write some articles about the women of the party to help maybe encourage more women to not think like that, or think that, because it's really not the truth. And I believe I believe the communists also want to make gender equal, and I think that is actually anti-diverse or anti. It's a negative connotation, because men and women are complementary, and we are different, but we both have. There's an empathetic nature that women have, and a compassionate nature that we need in equal amounts as we need the strength or the more kind of edge of a man. And I think it's another thing.
And also in aesthetics. So women make things beautiful, men make things work.
I like that.
There's a quote like that: a man will make you a house, and a woman will make you a home.
Yeah, I agree.
Something like that. And of course, there are men and women who are more towards or inclined towards one area or the other. So we're individuals, right? Before we're men and women. But there are undeniable aspects of each sex. Natural law, once again, one of your writers saying. And that's the thing. There's a quote that I love that it says, women in our generation is so focused on being equal to men that they forget about being what they are. Because there are things we're unique about as individuals, as women, as each aspect of our personality, of our person. So that's the thing. We're so obsessed in this generation on being equal that we're not being who we are.
Well, that is the point. Like you say, this equality enforced equality and this idea, it's a perversion. It really is. It's perverse. They're perverting the entire idea of equality, because we talk about equality. Well, equal in what? I mean, I got friends that can, they could run 10 miles faster than, I could, and they're superior to me in that. Maybe they say Ryan's is superior if you need something wired, or maybe this guy's a superior guitar player. What am I going to do? This is the communist ethos would say, take his guitar away until I'm as good as him or something. Whereas the libertarian ethos would say, man, teach me teach me how to play like that, bro. And we uplift each other. And this whole thing of tear down to make equal versus the libertarian principle, which is to express an ideal. And, as a heathen, this is why I try to tell a lot of heathens that libertarianism is the only appropriate religion, because a heathen we follow our year based on, like, our holidays are based on lunar cycles, and so there's a time for celebrating your harvest, and these things kind of connect and ground us back to the earth in as far as the human experience and technology. It's like a lot of technology is air conditioning. You're separating yourself from nature. That's why I like to ride a motorcycle. I get wet when it rains. I smell the cows when I go by the field. So to the libertarian philosophy is the expression of natural law in politics. It is a meritocracy. It is use all the gifts that you have to the best of your ability and enjoy the rewards thereof. And this always lifts all the boats. And the result is always better than a collectivist desire to make everything equal.
Oh, yeah. Well, we can have a talk about that specifically one day, about more primitive communities and how they interact with nature, if you like. And that's also something I mentioned not so long ago, about how the indigenous populations disappeared in Cuba. And the official rhetoric is that it was the Spaniards who vanquished them, and that's not true.
Right.
They were inserted into this equal system where they couldn't be different. So after communism, they had to be integrated as just another person from society. They couldn't have their individual, tribal, collective expression if it was not part of the outer collective expression. So sure. What's chosen and what's enforced, and what we said about history and who is who and who says what, and that happens in most governments anyway. But the difference is that in Cuba, there's persecution is more reinforced, and it's not only in the government. Do you remember the case of this kid Elian Gonzalez?
Oh yeah.
That he arrived, his mom died at sea when they were going to Miami, and
yep.
His father won custody and they took him back to the island. Now he's the leader of neighborhood spies.
Wow. So they just took this kid, like brainwashed him and used him like a symbol, basically.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Imagine just like if some of the people who are hearing this, like just imagine if you have an opinion, if you say, like in 1984, if you say taxes are too high, for instance, and all of a sudden in the afternoon, a police officer comes and knocks on your door and said, "Excuse me, sir, someone in your building said that you had said something irregular," or taxation is theft, or sharing a meme, something as simple as that in Cuba could get you in prison.
I think that's why I have such a... Yeah, well, I think that's why I have such a empathy. I mean, there's a lot of things that going on in the world and all that, but people that live under these sort of regimes, it's just because I am such a hyper individualist and I've always been different. I've always marched to the beat of a different drummer, but I was blessed to be born in a place where that doesn't get you killed, or arrested. But I'm watching them try to make that happen. And like you talk about diversity, what our party has been saying in regards to the removal of all these monuments is we said, instead of taking down the monument to the Confederate soldier, 90% of the South didn't have any slaves. They were drafted, is just saying, man, remember this guy who died. And so rather than tear down this monument, why don't we all just build a monument for the victims of slavery too? Then everybody can be happy. But no, they want to destroy something instead of build something. And that is really kind of communism in a nutshell. Diversity is a Confederate flag shaking hands with a son of as descendants of slaves like we were doing in our party, whereas the other people, they want to use taxpayer money to destroy some historical artifact.
So that's the thing. That's not only communism in essence, but mostly post-Marxism, which is born with Gramsci, that's about deconstructing. So that's literally deconstructing. It's not proposing. It's not building. So even if you take it into a, let's say, biological level, the function of a cell is either to move forward or to pull back. Because you either do things with love, you build, you reproduce, or you pull back, you get defensive, and you destroy. You don't even have to, I don't know, have high morals or ethics. You can be as simple as a cell and just have two functions. And that's the thing. They deconstruct. All they propose is to destroy. There's this band that I used to love when I was a teenager, and now that once you get into the mindset, Atari Teenage Riot, they're from Germany. They have a song that's called Destroy 2,000 Years of Culture. And another song that's called Deutschland Has Gotta Die. And then you realize how cultural Marxism is everywhere. And this idea
no, it is.
Instead of proposing, instead of having initiative, instead of being an entrepreneur, it's destroy what exists because it's bad. And
well, that's why they call it.
What is your legacy?
That's what they call it is critical theory. It's always critical. All they do is criticize and tear down. And the goal is to make a sane morass, to have a situation where everything is broken so that they can offer the big government solution. So it's all a lie when they say they want diversity. Like I make the joke, it's like even their communist laws, right? Think about what the Obamacare healthcare law they passed here on the way to socializing our medicine was called the Affordable Care Act, and it made our healthcare triple, or the Patriot Act, which took away your right to privacy. It's like the communists are almost it's almost humorous. It's like 1984. I think Orwell was right. He was just a decade or two off, maybe.
Exactly. So every time something carries a name, it doesn't mean they're going to protect it, but just take control over it. And I think in that sense, the women I mentioned, the ladies in white, are the most, important symbol on the island. Like I told you, the president of our party, Caridad, she was protesting for the freedom of political prisoners, and she was beaten by government security guards. And she was in intensive care for 10 days. And of course, feminists never protest about how Cuban women are beaten on the street. A few of them had miscarriages because both police and government sympathizers beat them. It doesn't matter if they're pregnant. And that's how
they don't say anything about the the feminists don't say anything about the people in Europe when they bring in the mass refugees. That's a whole other thing, is because my position on all that stuff is kind of murky. I don't know if you've ever seen me, but I've actually advocated taking the whole island of Cuba if they want to come over here, and they're not, they come on because they understand communism. They would be an asset as far as they would be like, no, we already seen what this looks like, but then it's like to blow up a country and then bring in people, they oppress women, and then the same people that, they're against some kind of wage gap, but they won't say anything about these rapes by these, it's just crazy. People, it's a divide and conquer strategy, in my opinion. That is true.
Exactly. It's like you said, it's a fight against nature. So they're not fighting for anything just. They're just imposing. That's the thing. Communists don't create. They don't propose. They just destroy, decompose, deconstruct. And like you said, it's about ethics. They legalize robbery. They don't believe in I'm being repetitive, but that's the thing. They don't believe in working for what you have. And even if you want to work, you can't, because your opinions are contradictory to what the regime proposes. And I just read one of your watchers put, it's about ethics. Our beloved brother who was kidnapped on Monday and fortunately is okay. So They even robbed his shoes. He was approached at night. Someone confronted him, took him by the neck. He had a portfolio with Murray Rothbard's book, The Ethics of Freedom. Is it The Ethics of Liberty? I get confused because of the translation. And they even took his shoes off. So it was so difficult for him, because nowadays you don't know anyone's number by heart. To tell someone how he was, he couldn't even walk home. And he didn't want to walk alone either. Just imagine that. You'd be confronted, mugged by government thugs. How do you feel safe? Who can you trust?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that, this is another reason, somebody, when we had this controversy going with the LNC, and they're like, oh, well, there's so much stuff around the world. I said, listen, man, this is 90 miles from Florida where I live. I am not going to sit here and pretend that this is not happening. And if there's something that I can do, I'm going to do it. And I'm not going to have an argument. Like, if I have to argue with somebody about it, then you're already kind of like a suspect, in my opinion, like of being a sympathizer, you know, and this cultural Marxism for people. Well, first of all, I just want to state, because a lot of people listening may have heard the story, because it's been going around the various libertarian groups. But yeah, the guy that disappeared earlier this week is who she's talking about, and he is safe. So praise, you know, whatever gods you believe in for that. And
yes, it was quite a relief. He's okay.
So okay. we have some a little bit even more hope than we got finding out the Libertarian Party of Cuba was founded. We have that notion. Now, listen, I would like to ask you, what about the gentlemen that were arrested in February? Has the international pressure at all affected that, or is there anything going on? Is there any news on them, or are they just shut out and just?
Sorry, your connection got a little bit interrupted. Who did you ask about?
Oh, the guys in February that were arrested. Is there any news on them? Or?
Well, they're still detained. Our team on the island has been very active. They took a gift for his mother on Mother's Day. We were able to get it's on the page, on the Partido Libertario Cubano Jose Martí on our page, a recording of the prisoners. We were able to get a recording from them, and we posted it from a Spanish page that's from Spain called Hablemos de Libertad, which means let's speak about freedom. So they're still detained, falsely accused. Like I mentioned before, that's the regime's MO. They invent crimes because there's nothing they could be blamed about. One of them was beaten. The other one had a cigarette butt turned off on his lip. And the international pressure has made it visible. Our team had the gonads to post signs with their pictures, which is why we suspect they got into trouble, and 2 of them were kidnapped this week. So that's the thing. Imagine posting a sign and then the next day you disappear.
Yeah, I mean, if all the memes and critical pictures I've posted on Facebook were punishable by that, I would have been fed to the fish a long time ago.
Exactly. So international pressure and visibility is our current strategy, because we feel if people know who they are, they'll notice when they're gone. So instead of being undercover and doing things under the table, under the carpet, we prefer, and it's something that took a long debate and blood, sweat, and tears, because we're afraid and we love them. I mean, I cried on Monday night, and because you think, like, are we doing the right thing? And of course we are. They've all been to prison before. They've all been in intensive care. And they know that they want to risk everything to be free.
Well, this is a subject that I wrote a song about. You know, we have a band. It's called Love Crime, and but I have a song called Respect the Gift, and it's about a Revolutionary War soldier in America. And we had this winter that the Continental Army spent in Valley Forge, and they were starving, and then I say, imagine you're leaving after freezing and starving all winter to fight the most powerful army on earth. And so many people died, and We never know their stories or who cried for them after they were gone. So for us to give away freedom in America, we're not respecting that gift they gave, you know? So right now we're watching the George Washington and the Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin of Cuba rising up against this communist dictatorship. And, you know, the amount of respect that I have for these guys and women, and it's mind blowing to me. It's like being a part of history. And I think that the weight and the power of the American public getting behind this effort is very important. As you know, part of why I've got you on is just like you guys have got to understand what it's like to risk your life for freedom and to know this is how. I mean, I could drive to Atlanta and it would take me about the same time as I could end up, you know, there in Cuba with these people. So this is so close to home, and I just encourage everybody to really get behind this movement and to make sure that they don't do these things in secret and whisk these people away. We need to speak their names, and that's why I've been writing about it and stuff, and let everybody know.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I'm reading some of the comments. He said, look at what's happening in Venezuela. And like I said, my dad had his dark past, his red past, and he tells me like stories of how things were in Cuba because at the beginning, Castro, as well as Chavez in Venezuela, they didn't say they were communists. They became communists. So
Obama won't say it. Obama's a progressive or a Democrat, right?
My cat just got on screen. In Animal Farm, remember who was the only animal that wouldn't be submissive? The cat. My cat just jumped on the table. So that's the thing. In Cuba, when they officially came out as communists, people took the streets. And you know what the Castros did? They released violent prisoners and gave them metal bars to beat people. And they released the pressure hoses from the firemen, and they hosed people down. So it's what's happening against the people. And they've demoralized them to the point that very few people take the streets. And if they do, they get beaten. And the same people are the ones who beat them.
Well, what does that say about the police in Berkeley, California, when the mayor tells the communist mayor that's part of Antifa, which they're not anti-fascists, they're communists. They just use that as an excuse. But the mayor tells the police, stand down. And, you know, we've all seen these videos where the people are like, look, there's someone getting beaten right over there. Go. No, we're told to stand down. It's the same thing. They're unleashing criminals. You know, this Antifa are just the communist street thugs that we saw, like you said, in Cuba. And it's the same thing. They're criminals, and they let them run rampant because it serves their purpose. And what's bad is that those people often are some of the first to get killed when they actually get their power because they don't want to have to, you know, deal with them as a threat later. You know, so it's just, you know, talk about a useful idiot.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So they're actual criminals because they commit crimes. And in Cuba, they actually release criminals from prisons. So it's double the threat. So that's the thing. They are communists and they are anti-fascist. That's the thing. It's a rhetoric that's been since the Second World War, that since international communists in Russia were fighting against national socialists, then some kids who were taught history by Marxists think they are fighting fascists just because they're not communists. So this whole black and white mindset, Democrat or Republican, this whole parallel that people can't see between the lines because they're raised in such a way that there's only two options.
Yeah, this is something
sorry. Nowadays, fascist is just anything you don't like. I carry a knife everywhere I go, and one of my roommates told me, "Oh, what a fascist." I'm like, "What?" Because I would defend myself? Yeah, because I would harm someone else. Like,
yeah, like there's no virtue. That is anti-nature. That is anti-natural law if you're an atheist, and it's anti-life, you know, if you're a theist of some sort. Like, you cannot, there's no defensible position whereby self-defense is wrong. That is actually what I started in politics, was in the gun rights, because I came from California where they, you know, I needed a gun really bad a lot. I had my skull broken. I have a bullet in my neck. But then I'm going to let this happen. in Florida because and we've been made the gun laws progressively better because the right to self-defense. Like there are so many things that I think the government would have already done in America if they did not know that there was an armed populace. So I can't speak enough about how important and look at America. They like to make warp the statistics and everything, but you are safer walking the streets of America than most places, and it's because people know, well, if I mess with that guy, I might get shot. Especially in the South. Like I've never
look at the statistics in Switzerland and Finland where the ratio per person of gun ownership is so high, and they're very peaceful societies. It goes far beyond having a gun. It's more related to your government starting a war against anything it doesn't like. War on drugs, war on poverty. You declare war on anything. That has a greater influence than having an actual gun.
Well, sure. I mean, the drug war is a great example. I bring that up a lot, that if you go back, the Gun Control Act of 1936 was the first federal gun grab power that they took. And that's when you used to go buy like a machine gun out of the Sears catalog and have it mailed to your house. And what happened was the government banned alcohol, and that created organized crime and a black market. And what are you going to do if someone steals your drugs or your alcohol? You can't call the police if they're illegal, right? So then you have to go be violent and take it back yourself. So then they pass. So it's like I've been trying to talk to the conservative kind of people that are, I said you can go like Portugal, and you can legalize or decriminalize rather, and you can lower drug use. So you're not an anti-drug position. The drug war is a pro-drug position. If you support the drug war, you want more people on drugs and the government to have more power. Period. Because the facts prove that it just making a black market is like, honestly, I find it amusing. Like the marijuana price is stable and the quality is legal, but it's because it's not taxed and it's the government's hands aren't in it. But it's kind of like a expression of the truth of our economic ideology in one sense. But in the other sense, all the violence they claim about the drug trade is just based on the fact that they've made it illegal. So now people have to take it upon themselves to enforce it. Like they're not adding the police murdering people in their crime statistics. So it's really not fair in the first place.
No, and also you're criminalizing what you do to your body. It's like, who are you to tell me what's good for me? I went to the last legalization of marijuana march with a grandmother who needed cannabis oil for her granddaughter. And neither of us are consumers, but it's the fact that who the hell are you to say that? Like, what's the difference between oregano and cannabis? Like, what's so arbitrary? It's having that power to say this weed is too harmful.
It's up. I mean, when you're making nature illegal, you are really crossing a line, in my opinion. You know what I mean? I think that the party has made a grave mistake in the way that they've marketed that effort, and I've written about that. You can see that at libertarianheathen.com. But because you can't go out when Nancy Reagan's going, just say no and go legalize heroin, But heroin's a chemical product that's distilled from a plant product. It's not the same thing. It's not even in the same class. And regardless, the harm of the government having it, people should get treatment, not arrested if they have a drug problem. In my opinion,
that's people that I think.
Yeah, that's what happened. They spent like a third of the money they were spending on enforcement on treatment, lowered drug use by 50%. Okay, so taxation theft, you can say what you want, but if you're going to reduce the expenditures by 2/3, let everybody out of the cage, and actually help people that have the drug problem need a hug, man, not a jail cell. They need somebody to like help them over whatever's making them so miserable they have to get high all day to forget it, in my opinion.
Exactly. Nurture, not torture.
Yeah, imagine that. That's a communism versus libertarianism. Nurture your skills or torture the guy because he's better than you at something,
Exactly. And it's also part of the infantilization of a society. It's treating adults like kids and telling them what to do or they'll get a boo-boo. So that's the thing. Until you're 18, you ask your parents for permission. And when you're 18 onward that you can vote, you ask nanny state.
Yeah, the nanny state. I like that one too, because that's really kind of how it is. And it's so paternalistic. I mean, these people talk about equality and human rights, but they're like completely dehumanizing people, and they're telling them that you're a fucking worm, and you can't, you know, it's like literally like, I mean, it's insanity. It really is.
But it's also part of the system. So if that's the stage, right? 18. So from 18 onward, you ask nanny state for permission. And that never lets you become responsible. You never grow a pair. So if you're not responsible, you can't be free because you never learn how to take decisions, how to make decisions, how to build. You're always dependent on permission. So it's something that really affects your psyche.
Well, we've talked about this with the civil rights movement. You know, I don't use the narrative that a lot of people, like I feel that a lot of white people in America have adopted this same sick philosophy, and they promote a victim narrative, and they go, affirmative action, it discriminates against white people. And I was like, dude, you're selling that all wrong. You need to tell the truth. Affirmative action is white supremacy, and these people that are claiming to be tolerant are saying that black people are so stupid they can't succeed without giving them a hand up, or brown people,
very
or whatever.
Condescending.
Yeah,
it's saying
so
if you don't help you, you're useless. It's the same to minorities, to women, and it's also very arbitrary. Like, who determines, for example, just to begin with, the term Hispanic. What is Hispanic? If you say Hispanic in a Spanish-speaking country, it sounds like someone who is from Spain. And that in the United States is underrepresented. I grew up in the U.S. I'm pale as snow. I have light blue eyes. So the Latina girls didn't integrate me because I didn't look like them. But since I was from a Spanish-speaking origin, I wasn't white. So it's also so arbitrary how you divide people and who says what. And this guy, that there was this terrorist attack in New York, I think, it said white Hispanic. Because saying Hispanic alone would be politically incorrect, right? But if you say white Hispanic, he's kind of one of the bad guys.
Yeah, they use that in the FBI Omnibus Crime Report. They combined white and Hispanic, and then they would use that to justify different things that they were trying to do. But it was all it was all just a big divide and conquer thing in there too, because they play games. The leftists play games with race. They're totally liars, because really, like I say, it was the leftists that created the welfare state, and it was the leftists before the welfare state. Like in 1968, when this great society and the welfare state all started, 85% of black children lived in a two-parent home in America. Now, 25% are raised in a two-parent home. There's nothing that, past oppression could ever do to you as bad as like taking your dad away and not having somebody to, be there for you and teach you this stuff. And they gave a reward to women to expel a contributing male and destroyed the family structure, and then called the people against it a racist. It's insanity.
And the drug war has added to that, because having a little pot leaves you without a daddy.
Or a mommy.
Or a mommy, whatever. It's dividing the family based on something they choose to do to themselves.
Yeah, we know somebody here, and it was this is something that you brought up, how they encourage the neighbors to tell on people. Well, they're doing that in America in the schools, and they're telling the kids, "Hey, have you ever seen your mom smoke a funny cigarette?" So we have a friend, and these people took in a bunch of children that, like, they have like 6 kids over there, because some of the parents were on real drugs, bad drugs, and all that. And so, but they tell them in the school. So next thing you know, the government's child protective services or whatever is over there harassing these people because they convinced one of the kids to say that they had smoked a funny cigarette. They accuse them of having some marijuana, which is like. So now these people are going through hell, and they're already like raised. They're already like, these kids would all be in the system, and the taxpayers would be paying for all of them. They're showing them love and trying to give them an environment to show them somebody that cares about them and help these kids out. And now they're being punished for it because maybe they wanted to go out back and smoke a joint afterwards to relax after raising 6 kids over there or whatever. It's just crazy, man.
Yeah, one of your readers just wrote that it's part of government taking over family. And that's the thing, there's no limit. Once they get control of the family, they control everything, because There's a very good essay by the guy whose father sponsored Marx. What's his name? Engels. It's he has an essay called "The State, the Family, and Private Property," something like that. So that's the idea. They speak about how capitalism created the family, which sounds like an awkward concept, but if you think about medieval times, feudalism, the wealthy had children to wed them off to other wealthy landowners. The poor had children to help them on the land. This concept of loving your kids, creating a family, has been in different times of history, but when there's scarcity, there's a more utilitarian version of family. You don't have time to sit down and talk, to love each other, to share your feelings. It's just work on the field or marry someone who gives me power. So the middle class is what actually made this prototype of the happy mom, the cute kids, which is now, so that's a process of evolution. And we're taught that that traditional concept is degrading. And actually, one of the concepts was a Cuban. It's the guy from I Love Lucy, her Cuban husband, remember? So this prototype. So that's
Ricky Ricardo, was it?
Ricky Ricardo, yeah, he was Cuban. Desi Arnaz, I think, was his name.
Yep.
So that's the idea. And what took thousands of years of evolution is seen as something degrading and regressive and oppressive. I think it was Chesterton who said feminism made women believe that they were slaves for helping their husbands, and now they're free for serving an employer, something like that.
Yeah, well, this all goes back to this cultural Marxism, and what people don't understand where this philosophy came from. So I'll give a quick recap: is that when the Bolshevik Revolution happened in Russia, they were like really emboldened, and they had taken over this big country. So Hungary and Germany had communist revolutions that failed relatively quick. And so the Comintern, which was the international communist, governing body, they commissioned a study to figure out why communism and the proletariat revolution was not successful in the West. And they determined that it was our culture, because we had the Orthodox the Russian Orthodox Church. They had more of a collectivist version of the way they worshiped, God and their church. But in the West, it was this personal relationship with Jesus Christ, like with the evangelicals will tell you. So the religion was a problem because everybody felt that they had a personal relationship with God, trying to make themselves better. And then the other elements of our culture, just a general prizing of individual achievement in America because of our pioneer and, settler forefathers and all this stuff. So they said that we have to destroy this concept of family, church, all these things that would bind it, why they want to attack Southern history, because people from the South feel a kinship with one another. You see another guy with a rebel flag belt buckle, and you're off in Illinois somewhere, you're like, oh, hell yeah, this is one of my people, So they got to destroy anything like that binds us together without government. That is a voluntary thing, something that gives you hope and pride and makes you feel like I feel like a obligation, like I say, that song Respect the Gift. I feel an obligation to my forefathers to make my country better and to continue the work of making ourselves more free and more prosperous. You have to kill that before anyone will accept socialism and become dependent by choice.
And speaking of that, and that goes even further, one of your readers just said to talk about the experience of being a fair-skinned Latina in the United States. It's just another form of collectivism. In South Florida, I don't know how far south you were, but in South Florida,
Jay's a good friend of ours. He's in the party, and he lives in South Florida. I met him there. Yeah.
When I was in school, there was a day called Cracker Day, where just for being white or looking white, you were beaten. And that's something many people don't talk about. So that's the thing. To speak about inverted racism is ridiculous, because racism isn't towards one direction or another. And racism is just collectivism. So that's the thing. If you don't fit in, remember we spoke about that, about far right, far left? You can think it makes sense, but once you're the group that it's against, game over. And collectivism in all aspects is the same thing. I was not white because I was born somewhere else, and I was not Latina because I was too pale. So that's the thing with collectivism. But fortunately, I'm very petite, so I suppose people were compassionate towards me. But that didn't happen with boys that looked like me. So girls had an advantage in that sense.
Well, I'll tell you the story. I went through the same thing. Is I grew up in Southern California, so I'm going to this school, and I'm like a white kid that speaks English. You got all these people that do not speak English, and I was a minority. And it was like, this is the Norteños bathroom. It's like it's like the Southern and the Mexican gangs have their own Norteños and Sureños. So it was like, well, I told the guy, I said, I'll piss on you before I'll piss on myself. And then, so then we had a big fight. So then a few white guys that were in school, we like band together. Now we're like skinheads. Now we're supposedly like Nazis or racists. But really we were just sticking up for ourselves. And then I joined the Navy. And then I traveled the world. So then now I joined the Libertarian Party, and they go, oh, look at his tattoos. He's a Nazi. It's like, you don't have no fucking idea. Like, I know more about racism. I basically, like, I didn't get just told to sit in the back of the bus. I got my skull fucking broken. But you're gonna sit here and like judge me. You're not being a fucking libertarian either, because I have way more experience than these people. And it's in America, the left wing what's sad about it is like it was all the people that were like not white have like been like super embracing and cool to me. And it was like these like pockets of like former liberals that became libertarians that were almost all lily white and probably don't even know any black people or whatever were the like strongest ones trying. It was like they're like brainwashed into just like they have to like, it's like living in like the Twilight Zone sometimes in this country. And at least in Cuba, that they're the so that's why it's important to bring you guys on and talk about this so people can kind of see the end game,
And like what happened with you, one collectivism takes you to another. But then with information, you see, that's what happens. It's the minority majority issue. Oh, one of my good friends just wrote that her mother's white and her dad is black, and she's telling her personal experience on your page. So that's the issue about collectivizing people based on arbitrary characteristics like gender, nationality, whatever, ethnicity. It matters who's in power and who imposes and how violence is exercised. And like I said, in the case of Cuba, I've heard people totally convinced that it's the black community that's keeping it strong because not all, but many of the white population left. And that isn't true. And knowing that Batista, who was a dictator, the former president, was black. So it's not that greed for power is a racial issue. No. And it's not that the issue for black people was improved with the Castro, which it wasn't. They were denied their culture. Their artifacts were put into a museum because diversity is an enemy of the collectivist ideal that is communism.
That is absolutely true. And just like we talked about how they will say like the Affordable Care Act, but it's really makes your insurance 3 times more, and the Patriot Act, which like takes your rights away, that the Patriots fought for or something. So that you same thing when they say multiculturalism, what they really mean is monoculturalism. They want one global culture of consumer debt credit slaves that have nothing other than the golden arches and Walmart to worship. And a bill at the end of the month that keeps them servile and keeps them motivated to work just so they don't go to debtor's prison or something of this nature, And this negative version, because see, the collectivism of, like I say, you have the different country, and you can think like, oh, my fellow Cubans that fought the struggle with me, and you have this bond. Well, that's like positive and voluntary, So like when I meet, like I've met some people, like last year I interviewed people from Japan and of Japanese ancestry, and I found this because I'm of Norse descent, like Vikings, right? So I found this neat parallel between like the culture and the Viking world culture. And although we had a culture that was different, we found these like things that we're like, wow, this is so weird how like they came up with the same shit, even though they were like on the literally other sides of the earth. And this is like makes us bonded, voluntary and positive manner. Whereas the way that the communists would sell it is that, if he celebrates his Japanese heritage, it's at the expense of your Norse heritage or something, when it couldn't be further from the truth.
That's the thing. It's a pathology. Socialism professes that to have, you must remove. So if you have something, it's because you took it away from someone. They see wealth like a cake that has to be divided into the same amount of pieces. So let's say you have you work with electricity. If you have a fantastic idea, you can become rich with it. And you becoming rich doesn't make me poor. But since resentment is so ingrained into communist ideas, they can't see it otherwise. I see the personal case of my father. They wanted for him to take the Marxist ideals into the Ecuadorian rainforest, the indigenous communities, who in many cases are very primitive. And that was a cultural shock for him. Like, they have more to teach me than me to teach them, because they have their traditions so ingrained. Some people may agree, some may not, with how they've maintained this connection to nature. And shortly after that, he met my mom and he fell in love. And love is so contradictory to hate that when you build, when you grow forward, you can't go back into an ideology that spreads resentment. It's just incompatible. Unfortunately, I was born after that revelation.
Yeah, this is the whole thing about it. I like to use the analogy. It's like when the guys invents the automobile. Are you going to be like, well, the communist would say, well, I am a maker of horse and buggies, so the automobile is trying to destroy me, so I'm going to attack the automobile guys and make sure they can't create this good idea. You know what I mean? It's like regressive in every sense of the word. Yeah, like the taxi drivers are against Uber, right? Whereas really they would be like, man, I wouldn't have to pay this like crazy medallion fee like in New York City. It's something crazy, like $100,000 a year or something.
Also benefited minorities, not only ethnically, but also people with who are disabled. Because I read in an article somewhere, I think it was Ashton Kutcher who supported Uber because it was very difficult for a black guy to stop a cab in New York or whatever minority group, or let's say a Sikh who is confused for a Muslim and a Muslim who is moderate and confused with, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you have an Uber, a driver can say yes, no, and in general will say yes because it's a different interaction. And likewise, how many people who are deaf are Uber drivers? And you, as a passenger, get a notice that says they are deaf, and you say, hell yeah, I'll give this guy a chance. Or you'll say, no, you know what, I don't feel comfortable. But they have an opportunity to earn a living honestly. And that's what the free market does.
Yeah, well, the old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. Like, people will find solutions to their problems, but once you lay out, and furthermore, like the socialists, the communists, the Marxists, they lay out, no, this is the solution. And if you don't like it, you're the enemy of the state. You know what I mean? Like, and it's like their whole narrative, like, oh, you're against Obamacare, you want to make people uninsured that are a pre-existing condition, you know, and you're trying to take their insurance away. And it's like, no, we're trying to allow the market to create a solution for that problem, and we're trying to the lead up to socialist healthcare in America was preceded by excessive government regulation. So now the doctor is already under so much regulation, he's like farming it out to and really the insurance industry itself was because of government wage price controls in the Second World War that prevented the people from paying more money to productive employees, so they had to come up with another way to retain employees. So they started offering health insurance as a way around the caps and stuff that was going on because of the war. So we got a bunch of wars that we probably shouldn't have been fighting in the first place, and then we got regulations to try to support the war that then mess up the healthcare market, and then now everybody's used to having insurance, and then it becomes untenable, and then now we got to have communism because it's all effed up, and the whole thing all boils down to this like social change through a contrived crisis. They made the crisis by their stupid ass commie stuff, and then now we have to like accept their commie solution, which makes it work. I mean, it's insanity.
It's a cycle.
Yep.
It's like a snowball that keeps on growing, and then it turns into a commie avalanche.
Commie avalanche. Call us the artillery and the flamethrower on the snow. Right?
And now the post that we're an invasion and that we're a threat to the common good.
Well, that was funny you mentioned that there was a Catholic libertarian groups because from my perception, I've always seen the Catholic Church as, and I know that there was supposedly there was some anti-communist stuff with John Paul, but I always felt he was kind of like an aberration as far as a pope, because it just seems to me that they, kind of have a collectivist view versus the Protestant view, of Christianity. And it seems like they often support that. I'm kind of curious, do you see that, would you say that, being in Latin America and, having obviously a lot more experience than I do down there, do you think that the the Catholic Church is more aligned with the socialist politicians, or is there Catholic movements is that in other words, are they moving away or still kind of seem to be colluding with socialists?
Well, this Pope for sure is a populist, no doubt. But I would say that Catholics in general are into a more family-oriented traditional perspective, but there's really no unity in that sense. This Pope is a populist, more than a socialist. Well, yeah, he's more of the school of Perón, who was Argentina's fascist dictator, who ruined this beautiful country, this industrious country. You're more than welcome one day. Buenos Aires is so beautiful. And each time you see a beautiful building, you see what it was like before him. So it was the sixth richest country in the world before him. So anyway, he's really twisted current within the Catholic tradition. So, for example, he said a quote that said, "What's yours should be the poor's because it's theirs." So what's yours is no longer yours, but theirs. So that's the thing. It's like what you said about political correctness. It's being condescending. It's saying if you don't give it to them, they can't have it. So you're saying they're inferior to you. And it's also taking away the voluntary action of wanting to give it and turning it to having to give it. And yes, Protestantism is more industrious in that sense. It's also more in tune with free will and building, because if you were created by a creator, then you can create. Whereas Catholicism is a little bit more guilt-ridden. But I wouldn't say it's a unanimous movement, because then you have the Acton Institute, which is Catholic. And one of the biggest or the most important philosophers and professors in tune with Mises, who is one of the administrators in Mises Cuba, Gabriel Zanotti, is fantastic. He's Catholic. He's an anarcho-capitalist. And he makes references of Star Trek. So there's no disagreement between having faith, defending the free market, embracing science fiction. So I wouldn't say there's one unique way of being a Catholic, nor is it incompatible with free market ideas. The Pope is another story. He's a populist, and he is shameless, because in Venezuela,
well, now I think when you say populist,
I went to take communion. They couldn't make the communion bread because there was no more flour. There was.
I think when you say populist, I think some of the American audience is a little bit. See, in America, populism is kind of like an anti-communist kind of movement. So I think there's a little. I think what she means is he's kind of going with the flow, he's kind of supporting these collective, appealing to the poor and the kind of. Yeah.
Populist would mean collectivist, but also appealing to the masses. But what I was saying in Venezuela, they changed our Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven. They said Chavez who art in heaven, and instead of freeing us from sin, it said free us from capitalism. And the Pope said nothing.
Well, that's an indictment on him right there, as far as I'm concerned. But I do know, one of J.D. Pierce is, he's on the executive committee of the party in Florida with me. He's a Catholic, but he's a great man and tireless for liberty. So I don't think it's incompatible. I was just kind of curious how, because, the Catholic Church has a lot of resources and money and power. So I'm just kind of curious if they if they tend to aid and abet the deal, or if there's if there's any kind of movement in the church to reject it. I'm just kind of curious, but I guess they probably just try to go.
There's both sides.
So it's just individuals that have the belief in their God, but they may choose to align with one side or the other, basically. There's no real... The church itself is not homogenous.
But if you think of it in a broader scope, socialists believe that before capitalism, humanity lived in the Garden of Eden. I wrote about that not long ago. So that's why they think the state can act as a savior, to relieve us from our sin of wanting to be prosperous.
Well, that makes sense why they would want to destroy all of the history and want to get how we achieved and created countries and nation and all this, because then they can't. That's going to mess up their narrative of how great everything was before.
Yeah.
So here's another angle, because you brought up fascism, and this is something that I've had a lot of work that I've done lately, is to try to explain to people, because for the Antifa and these people to always use the word fascist, they don't really seem to understand the history of all these movements. Fascism is a reactionary movement against communism. Like, fascism arose due to the encroachment of communism in Europe, and all of the fascist movements and even the Nazi Party. Hitler got his start fighting communists in the streets, and people choose fascism as a reaction against communism. So I've been trying to I've criticized, because the Nick Sarwark, the Libertarian chairman here, said that he understands why Antifa would riot. Milo was going to out illegal people that were getting free college and some craziness. And I wrote a real, stiff article on it. And I'm like, if you want to have fascism, let the communists run rampant in the streets, and that's part of what you see with Trump, and they, it's like the elements that people find distasteful and is all basically a response to the communism that Obama was promoting. So liberty, if you don't like fascism, be a libertarian, because you can prevent communism from becoming in power, because the most people will turn to a fascist strongman to help them defeat a communist strongman. So I've been, that's one of the things we do at the American Guard, is like, we're trying to short circuit that process so that we don't have America end up with a choice between fascism or kind of say, no, liberty is your third choice and the best choice.
Exactly. Now, I mentioned fascist because actually the motto of the party of Perón, who was, remember, "Don't Cry for Me, Argentina." Evita was his wife.
Yeah. They made a big movie. I think, wasn't Madonna played her in the movie or something?
Yeah. His motto was, "Neither Yankees nor Marxists. We are the third wave," which was what fascism proposed. We are against capitalism and we are against Marxism. And he trained with Mussolini's methodology in Italy. So, and actually, that's how it all started, how education started to be ruined in Latin America. All kids had a book that said his name, his wife's name, Evita, then mom and dad. So you had to love the leaders more than you loved mom and dad.
Sure. That's what they have to do. Hey, quiet. Sorry, I got the kids running in here.
That's fine.
My little maniacs over there, the future libertarians of the world. But this whole thing, it's like, I hate to ruin everybody's helicopter meme fun, but it was Pinochet wasn't as great as everybody. Just because he threw communists out of the helicopter. I interviewed some guys from Chile and stuff. I'm going to do some more down there. But the whole idea is, to go. I mean, fascism is private ownership but government control, and that's going to lead you down to a dark place eventually anyways. It's like,
because power grows.
Right. And this is what a lot of people, they would like lift up some leader, like back when I used to hang out with a lot of the skinheads. I'd be like, you understand, like, let's say your little Hitler god was to like survive the war and won. he would die and his annoying kid would be the one with all that absolute power, and he would oppress you and screw with you. It was just like the history of Europe. You know, you have a King Arthur or something, but then you have, like the kings that my ancestors in Scotland, because they came from Norway to Scotland, and they fought all these English tyrants, and like, you might have a good king who cared about the people and place it. Then the next guy, he was just a complete asshole, tortured everybody and everything. So you just can't trust your sustenance. You can't trust your personal liberty. You can't trust your legacy for your inheritance for your kids. You can't trust this to any other people but yourself. And the sovereign individual is going to be the future of the world, and we just need to chart our way to that path.
Exactly. And in Cuba, it went from brother to brother.
Yeah. Oh, they did the same thing. I mean, there was so many betrayals, and Alexander Ramsey, who is my son is named after, that is to be born in August, he freed Scotland. William Ramsey signed the Declaration of Arborough, which was like the Declaration of Independence, and it was the first time humans ever asserted a right to self-ownership and self-rule and to appoint their own leaders. But it was 30, 40 years later when finally Scotland was freed, and a guy that was should have been an ally, he was jealous because he tried to take the castle and lost, and then Alexander took it, and he ended up kidnapping him, putting him in. So yeah, this is the tale of humanity is
and
brothers
then
turning
Scotland voted its way into dependence.
Yeah, yep, and I'm proud to say that we're pushing 900 years that the Ramsey Castle has nobody has ever taken. So you can go there today and spend the night at breakfast. But this is legacy. Yeah. But so how can I not fight for freedom now? We had this debate. I brought it up in Orlando about the monument there. And we're going back this weekend for a protest down there. But, they say that, you're defending racists for sticking up for the monument. I say, if you knew anything about my family, the first abolitionist in Scotland who was persecuted his whole life afterwards in the 1700s was a Ramsey that was the first person to bring up the idea that the slavery in the West Indies was bullshit. So what? Now I'm not allowed to, now I'm a racist because I defend some of his descendants who fought the federal government for the same reasons the founding fathers fought the English government. They wanted self-determination and they didn't want to be taxed to death. That whole war was about tariffs and taxes. A lot of people have a misconception, but that's the way they drive down dissent. Like you say, they can use this label and collectivize everything and just wash away any polite or legitimate historical discussion.
Well, you have some kids running, and I hear some meowing.
You got your kids too, right? So, all right.
Not
so you got right. Go ahead and give us any websites, and is there any particular efforts that you have right now that you would like to get out to the listeners as far as ways they can help or ways that they can what would be the top thing? We just got to get everybody, because I know there's a lot of sympathetic people and they want to help you out. So what can we do to help the Libertarian Party of Cuba and Mises Cuba?
Sure. You can follow us on, we'll share the links, Partido Libertario Cubano José Martí, Instituto, it's all in Spanish, Instituto Mises Cuba, and we have a PayPal account. It's Mises Cuba Contacto, so contact and the final O, which is contact in Spanish. That's where you can donate. We had an issue with Bitcoin, but we'll fix it up by next week. So
I know a lot of libertarians like the Bitcoin, so yeah, we'll try to hook them. Yeah. Just make sure everybody listening, want me or her will post these in the comments section on Mad American Network's Facebook page afterwards to make sure you guys will have a link to just click or something,
So the idea is to have as soon as possible. We had a delay with 2 kidnappings this week, but the idea is to create the next library, because despite all the crap they say about how great education is in Cuba, it's not. not only the well, starting from the fact that they're indoctrinated, but even the content of how they write. And that's in the only sense I'm a Nazi. I'm a grammar Nazi.
Brandy is a grammar Nazi. I call her the head grammar Nazi. You are sisters. You are sisters, whether you know it or not. We had a big Oxford comma debate the other day.
So for me, when I see what some Cubans write, it's like, really? That's how good public education is? I don't think so. So it's really
call it government education. Make sure you get
you're
that
right.
out.
Government education.
Yeah.
So state-run education. So we really need to get more workshops going, and from very basic things, like you said, you can't read Hazlitt out of the blue. You need a basis, and we need to help them get out of that mindset. So I saw in what your readers writing a lot about human nature, and what you said also human nature. Human nature is to be free. But state-run education teaches you to appreciate indoctrination. So we need these workshops to help spread the word, to get people thinking differently, or not even, because the people who get there already think different, but they need to find the path to learn about economy, to learn about politics, to learn about ethics. So basically, the money we collect is to keep them online, to keep them communicated, because they don't have. Our last member, Nelson, who was abducted, he doesn't have a phone, so he can't call. So our next big cost is, well, not big. We found a really cheap phone to get him a phone, get him a line, so he can at least call to let us know when something happened to him. So they need their phones charged, which is very funny about the free market. Cubans on the island don't have these 2-for-1 sales, but if you charge credit on their phones from the outside, you get a 2-for-1. So they need phone credit, they need internet credit to be in touch with us, and we're gathering funds to build the next library, and also to give them a decent way of living, because dissidents, like I mentioned, can't work because you need a license to work. So all the activities they do, we're funding them in such a way, since they are libertarians and they believe in exchange, they don't want to live off of us. They want their work to be paid for. So that's what we're working on.
Well, Americans listening, I want you guys to go back to the founders of America that fought the English oppression. And what did they do? They pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And that's what I'm watching happening right before my eyes, so close to our shores. So I want you guys to think about that, maybe one less 12-pack this week and help these people out. And you can actually literally strike a direct blow against communist oppression so close to our shores. So, suck it up, guys, man. Buy one less bag of weed or something, and help these people out.
And the cost is low. It's 28 Cuban pesos, which is almost equivalent to get a phone. With $20 US, they have 1 hour per dollar. How long are you scrolling on the internet? So 20 hours doesn't go a long way, but it's enough for them to say we're okay. It's enough for them to write a report, and it's enough for them to write an article and sell it to a newspaper and get a decent way of living. And it's also a way for us as freedom lovers to get that information out of the island. So all the Antifa and all the progressive and all these kids who are fighting to be submitted, fighting for us who live in free societies to live under the regime that they live in. So this is a way of us sponsoring information that will help us be free more than we are today, and never like they are over there.
No, this is something you guys need to understand, everybody listening. I'm not even asking you to give something as charity. They're going to give us something back. They're going to give us the ability to reach out and tell all these fucking idiots on the college campuses promoting this dumbass shit and tell them from a place that already did this how stupid it is. So, this is like this is a mutually beneficial idea, because the more their voices get out, the more we will have to counteract these morons in the Antifa and everything else. So you're going to get something for your investment,
Exactly. And it's a private initiative.
Yeah,
That's
and we're doing.
if we're fighting against state handouts, let's do something ourselves. Let's prove we don't need it. We don't need the government to take money out of our pockets to help. We do it ourselves because we want to, not because we have to.
Yeah, this ties to so many things, you know, because that's the way the government wants to paint themselves as the only solution to the problem. But the reality is that by showing that we can, you know, you could go and try to petition the State Department to do something. Well, let's just do something ourselves and take the bureaucrats out of the loop. You know, this is direct aid. This is like the most anarchists, libertarians, minarchists, everybody can get behind this sort of a program.
Exactly. Thank you very much for your airtime and for helping us share the message.
Oh man, I want to. You've already mentioned like 3 or 4 other people that I'm like, oh, I want to talk to that guy too, or her. I would like to talk to the lady in white that you talked about.
They don't speak English.
Well, maybe we can get a translator or something. I don't know. We got Spanish-speaking people too. We do a lot of Spanish language stuff in South Florida for the party too, so maybe I can even hook them up. We Miami affiliate has they have like their own like studio and everything, so maybe we can have something there where they can reach out to that community. I mean, I want to facilitate global anti-communist revolution. That's my goal in life. So whatever we can do.
Well, I'm in on the fight.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening. This is Global Dissident Voices on the Mad American Network. Stay on, Mamela. I'm going to talk to you off air real quick before you go. And thank you, everybody, so much for listening. I really enjoyed this.
Ladies and gentlemen. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Ladies, gentlemen, revolutionaries, maniacs, dissidents, all of y'all. We love you guys. Smash communism. Love your country. Good night.
Bye.